Hi there. Apologies for the delay. We were trying to get the audio system working, and they're going to be running an external speaker off this laptop, so everything should be fine. So my name is Håkan Fasti. I'm Assistant Professor of Interaction Design here, and I would like to welcome you to the third installation of our lecture series, which we are informally calling Three Bald White Guys Talk About Interaction Design. Yeah. So tonight, I have the pleasure of introducing Kristian Simsarian, who is a pioneer, I believe, in the field of interaction design education. Kristian has a PhD in social robotics and virtual reality from long ago at a university in Sweden. You might not know that he actually speaks some Swedish. And I met Kristian about 10 years ago at IDEO, where we were working together. And I think the thing for me about Kristian and his work, which has always really struck me, is just his ability to get stuff started. He's a doer and a starter in a field of interaction design, which at the time we weren't even calling that. He founded the software experience design practice at IDEO, where I worked with him years ago. And then since coming to CCA, he's actually founded the interaction design program itself. So we have a lot to thank him for just for being here tonight. Tonight he's going to be talking about humanizing technology and the role of meaning in interaction design. And I think that's all I have to say. So without further ado, here's Kristian.
Let's see, is this working? Right here. Is it, are you hearing me? You're hearing me? Yeah. Jerry's saying no. Are you hearing me? Okay. Okay, it's not working. How about now? Yeah. Thank you, Jerry. Thank you. It's wonderful to see so many friends out here, and it's wonderful to work with a colleague like Håkan. Such a pleasure, and thank you. We just won an award, and we're really excited. Best academic program. These guys, and I was saying, if we win, I'm gonna retain the right for a little while to talk about, here I am on the stage of the award-winning program, Interaction Design, or I'm gonna use this laptop, by the chair of the award-winning, it's been a lot of work, and a lot of people in this room have been working together for a few years to kind of do this thing, and it's really fantastic to see some recognition of that. So thanks to a lot of people. I see a lot of teachers and students who have been working really hard. What I want to talk about is, I named this before I did the talk, but I want to talk about meaning, and I want to talk about our mission, which is humanizing technology. And I think this is a quest that's going to take many, 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 many years. And I get asked what I mean by that, and I think part of that quest I wanted to kick off this dialogue tonight and really kind of delve a little bit inside me to say, what do I think that means, and ask all of you to kind of delve a little bit to try and figure out what that means. So I'm going to try and focus mostly the meaning on the interaction stuff, like the kind of stuff that interaction designers are doing every day. And I was telling Graham, where are you, Graham? That I have a tendency to get on a soapbox, and I'm going to try and check that tendency. And I gave him permission to throw fruit at me if I get too far there. But I've played a big role in a lot of the things that music that I'm going to be talking about. So and it kind of brings home that thing, like be part of the problem to be part of the solution. Oh, that's excellent. That's the shop. Excellent. Love it. Okay, so you guys probably know this sign from movie theaters and that sort of thing. And I just wanted to kick off with something different, which is just to embrace this. I couldn't resist this. I found this clip art. And so instead of turning off your cell phones, I want to ask you to all to reach in and turn them on. So just turn them on. It's for a short period. And pay a little homage to a wonderful, creative human being and fellow Californian, John Cage, who was hailed as one of the most influential modern composers. And I'm sure many of you know his piece, and maybe you've even heard it, his piece 433 was noted as being 4 minutes and 33 seconds of silence, or 4 minutes and 33 seconds of what's happening around us. And in 1982, this was played in the 50s at Carnegie Hall, and in 1982, Cage said this was probably his most important work. And so things have, we're now 50 years later, 60 years later, things have gotten a bit more compressed. We're going to do 2 minutes and 33 seconds, so turn on your cell phones. Turn on those buzzers and those ringers and what have you. And so in this moment, listen. So one of the, every discipline has a medium, and one of the things we talk about as the interaction design medium is time. And every discipline or every medium also has a negative space. And the negative space, for us, part of that is silence and non-activity, like the pauses in between. And the absence of something happening. So just hold on to that for a moment. If you came to the last talk, this is one of my paraphrases. Does that seem fair, Håkon? Sure. Okay. So I'm relying on Håkon's talk and building on that. I want to talk about three primary connections to the world as just kind of a background to the other things I want to say about our practice. So one of them is our connection with nature. And by the way, I'm going to try and throw in as many pictures of my daughter as I can. I'm that kind of dad. This was last weekend walking in the woods. So and I'm going to talk about how these connections are mediated. And there's no surprise here. Anybody who's read anything anything that's even vaguely postmodern is going on about that. So I'm not going to go on about pastiche and postmodernism and all that sort of thing, but I do want to bring this in as context to make a point. So certainly our connection with nature is mediated, and a lot of that happens, happened through another discipline, another medium, and a lot of it is really fantastic. And more, this is actually in our medium, in interaction design, and I'll talk about some of that. I'll show a few examples of student work where that's happening. One thing that's got me, again, as a parent, was this book, Last Child in the Woods. And how many people have seen this or read this? Kind of an amazing polemic about what he calls nature deficit disorder, and a lot of research in there, and a connection to the growing phenomenon of attention deficit disorder, and how that can partly be traced to a disconnect with nature. At least that's Dr. Love's opinion. And my view on this, I read this, I was like, oh my God, the more we're only exposed to things that are human created, the more our complexity is limited. Like if humans can create it, then it's by definition, complexity is what we can understand and no more. So there isn't actually a kind of continual continual search for the meaning and the awe and the sublime in the things that just humans create. In nature, there's such incredible complexity that it's awe-inspiring, and its depth is incalculable. It's just turning over a rock in the woods has incredible complexity, more than we can create in our apps or our pieces of software at this point. And the second connection is that with others. Again, this is my daughter last week. With her friend Sam. And clearly that's also mediated. One of the precursor, and I actually had the pleasure of, when I was doing my master's in Virginia, of going through all the Edison and Watson archives, because we were trying to figure out who was first, and going through all their notebooks. And so this has meaning to me. This is Watson and Graham Bell, first images from their first patent, and talking on the phone. And in that moment, a lot changed, the kind of connectivity. And it leads us to a present moment where, the connections, not just the communication, the connections are deeply mediated in a way. And you can go online and read plenty of critiques about Facebook and social networks. Some of my main complaints about this are the lack of persistence, how everything is just the newest, and it's almost impossible to search for something old or older, even when you know what you're looking for. That ads are forced in there somehow, things that I didn't actually want. Somehow the things I add on there, my own creativity, my own data is not really mine. That I'm becoming the product. I'm sure you've all read that one. And in a way, I'm choosing to offer my data in exchange for a service. And more, I'm not sure it's worth it. Like I'm choosing to offer all my connections and all the people I care about and things that I create. And it's really bringing up that question for me, is like, oh, is that service actually worth that? Because I don't even know what I'm giving up. And a couple of our seniors are actually looking at some of this, and they're seeing that there's this work, and it's really lovely to see. This one is really interesting. So this is Tinder, which is building off of a lot of other kind of meetup apps that were happening, sort of geo, on the phone. And I'm sure you can find critiques of this one too, but it's like images that go by, you select the ones you like, and if there's a match, you get identified. There's some wonderful things happening here, what people are calling, as opposed to big data, small data, and the cards and the gestures of flipping through that. It's really kind of novel and exciting in many ways. But it's also taking our most important connections, that with others, our relationships, and somehow treating them at a very surface level. Something I'll be talking about in a little bit is maybe using some of the most primal parts of our brain to do this. And that may be fine. Maybe it's just about getting laid, and that's cool. But there's so much more. is the main point there. And then there's all sorts of, around this kind of thing about the like, and there's all sorts of businesses that sit on top of that, like how to get more likes, how tricks and services to help you get more of this. And I'm constantly wondering, like, what for? Like, what does it get you to get more likes? Like, what is actually the aim? Is just getting more likes in itself? So that's the second one, connection to others. The last is the connection to self. So connection to nature, connection to others, connection to self. And I didn't have to work hard to get this photo. I think we see this every day. I was riding Caltrain earlier this week, and I just snapped it. And that's kind of what it looks like. There's one old woman there staring at the wall, but everyone else is staring down. We're actually going to start getting cricks in our neck from this. So, connection to ourselves. And this is a little bit of an older gesture, but how many are familiar with this? How many people do this pretty constantly? Okay, yeah, a lot of hands going up. Okay, so this gesture, what does it remind you of? Let's see if our sound is working, because I love the sound of this one. Let's see if we get some volume here. Does that have more volume? I don't know. Oh, is that? Okay. Well, let's go with it. I purposely chose an analog, older style one because I really love the sound of this thing. This is the best part here. Oh. The payout happened, but he, kept going. How many people have heard the story about how casinos are designed? Like this, the older story. No windows, no lights, no clocks, no outside light. You don't know when it's daylight. Anyway, apparently that's a very old story, because as I was looking into this, I found this guy, who's like the king of casinos, Thomas Rogers, is that right? And he has like redesigned the way they think about casino design in Las Vegas. So I just wanted to read a few quotes here. So he said, "Casinos are a place for bourbon, testosterone, and cigars. And the room's yields were falling short. So men weren't playing these games, women were. So there was a demographic shift. So Thomas redesigned the room, and he created a wall of windows to flood the slot machines with natural light. And he threw out the old furniture, replacing it with a palette of what he called garden conservatory, lime green, white leather, and gold. I wanted it to be bright and shimmery and full of flowers, a place where a lady might feel comfortable." Thomas even bought a collection of antique lotus flower sculptures, which he placed near a row of blinking video poker slots. But the real achievement may be psychological. They have remade the architecture of gaming itself, creating spaces that allow people to enjoy the act of losing money and encouraging them to lose even more. So this was Bellagio, and Bellagio is apparently half the size of MGM Grand, but per guest room, the resort generated 4 times as much revenue as the Las Vegas average. So, by applying modern design, not the old style design, right? Modern design. Basically, what was the quote there? Encouraging people to enjoy the act of losing money. So, what's going on there? This is going to be a brain science lecture, but I did want to point out this one thing. There's something called the limbic system, which I'm sure many of you know more about than I do, and there's a part in there called dopamine, that when we get excited, when we get a reward, basically this limbic system is looking for sex and food. And when we get some kind of reward that's getting us towards there, little dopamine, little feedback, dopamine shoots off, makes us feel good. That's it in a nutshell. It's a very ancient part of the brain. We share it with all mammals. And it's really core. So think food, sex, pleasure. Can I eat it? Can I make babies with it? And it's such a primal part of the brain that it's really easy to abuse. So it's right here. It's in this part where the forceps are. I felt like it was important to show a real brain. There's all sorts of diagrams. But look at how much else there is. right? Like, this is the part that's the other part out here. Yeah, I can walk over. Like, frontal cortex. This is all the wonderful human juicy stuff, right? This is what gives us all the abilities that most other animals don't have. How many people have heard about dark patterns? It's just fantastic stuff. I was just introduced to it. I love this guy. His name's Harry Brignall, and he's created a website. He's based in London, a designer in London, and collecting all these patterns for what he calls dark patterns. I was just going to read the quote. So, normally when you think of bad design, you think of a creator being sloppy or lazy, but with no ill intent. This type of bad design is known as a UI anti-pattern, the one where there's no ill intent. Dark patterns are different. They are not mistakes. They are carefully crafted and solid understandings of human psychology, and they do not have the user's interests in mind. We as designers, founders, UX and UI professionals and creators need to make a stance against dark patterns. And he's done this wonderful job of curating them and giving them categorizations. There's like a typology of them, and I love there's like privacy zuckering, which is like getting people to give away more of their privacy than they want. Friend spam, which is when somebody kind of ends up sending something on, like, oh, would you like to recommend? Bait and switch, disguised ads. Some of those we recognize. Some of them are extremely familiar. Like the one that feels really familiar for me is the newsletter one when you're just checking out. And the idea is that there's often confusing language there. That one of them is not and the other one is yes. And if you check both, you're not quite sure. And you often are really rushed and you're kind of finished. And that the comment is that this is often done on purposely. And there's a real wonderful theory on when that's done, and like low constraints and KPIs that are measuring something like engagement or number of newsletter signups. So I'm really inspired by this, and I'm going to try and get off my soapbox now. Graham hasn't thrown fruit at me, so thank you, sir. I walked the other day with Mr. Kelly Stuckey sitting here in the front row, and we had a great conversation. I shared some of my personal story and realized that it was something I really wanted to share here. And I wanted to be a designer forever. Like when I was, I don't know, 7, 8, I knew I wanted to be a designer, and I was really inspired by these people that were both technical and as soon as and artistic. And as soon as I learned about the right and left brains, I was like, oh, that's me. I'm a right and left brain guy kind of thing. And so Leonardo da Vinci was just like the bomb for me. And the next one was Frank Lloyd Wright, like the guy who could make these beautiful things that were engineering marvels. I was like, oh, that's what I'm going to do. And so when I was a young red-haired girl, this is my daughter this morning. She built this tower just before we were leaving, and it was really funny. She's like, Daddy, come and see my tower. And when I came in, she went, architecture. And so I tried architecture for a while, and it was at a time in the 80s when design and technology were really opposed to each other, and it didn't end up working very well. And I was getting good grades in the technology, so I stuck with that. And I did robotics for a while, especially collaborative robotics. And I found, like, this was a really fun project. We were trying to make these insect robots push these boxes towards the light. And it's funny, when I go on Google Scholar, I see this is the most cited work that I've done. But every time we got funding for doing this kind of thing, somebody wanted to put a gun in its hands. And that didn't sit right with me. And in the same lab, I moved over to the virtual reality group, and I kind of flipped the coin, like all this stuff for artificial intelligence, cognitive science, linguistics, visual perception, flip it around, and instead of making machines smart, make humans smart by using machines. And we did a lot of interface work. Here are some of the things. This was a ball that had a position sensor so you could lean and turn. We were using flat screens, about 1995, I'd say. Had a kind of visual thing, like a forerunner to the Kinect, programmed up this gesture recognition. And then we even did some wonderful art performances. This was at the big Dansens Hus in Stockholm, where a dancer was actually controlling the choreography as opposed to the choreography controlling the dancer or the music. So the dancer was sending off all these MIDI signals that were controlling all the events around her. Yeah, it was something like that, Dansens Hus. And then I discovered, well, it was part of the reason why I went to Sweden, and I started to get involved with these guys who were amazing. They were part of a workplace democracy movement where they were shaping technology. and doing so in a way that was about promoting participation. And I found this little tiny clip by one of my heroes, Pelein, and I apologize for the resolution, but I really want to share it because I feel like his words are still give me some shivers. So.
And by that we emphasize that the quality of the product was an interest of the producer and an interest of the trade union, and also that just as important goal was the quality of work, the work organization, the skills of the worker, and that there was a connection between the two. So the technology that should be produced should be skill-enhancing tools rather than de-skilled implementation.
So this work, my PhD was from one of the only places on the planet that's funded by industry and government, which many are, but also users. Because the unions have so much power and so much money in Sweden, they were the third part of the funding body and had a significant amount of leverage. And what they were interested in, since everybody has job security in Sweden, was how, in many ways, it's like how can we promote the liberation of all beings? But it's about how can we maximize potential in the workplace? How can we work towards self-actualization? And that's really rung true. And this first project was the Utopia project, where it was at the shift when the new graphical computers were coming in. Things like the Macintosh were just about to happen, so it's 1984. And looking at newspaper layout, and they said, oh my God, we've got these visual screens, we've got laser printers, a disruption is about to happen. So for Pelein, how can we make tools that actually are skill enhancing and not skill reducing? And so just this amazing work where the seeds of what Americans call participatory design are sown in this project. They called it cooperative design. And it's very much what came over here as participatory design. And there, it's actually a political work of activism. So that led me to do a project called Kid Story, where we said we want to make technology as collaborative as a box of crayons or a pile of blocks. And we started working in one of the disadvantaged schools, because that was a great place to get funding and a great set of diverse students. It was about 60% immigrant students in Rågsved, that's an R-O-J. And one of the first things we built was realizing that mouse systems are privileging the person who has the mouse. We extended, and we actually had to work with Microsoft to do this, we extended the mouse system so you could plug in 256 devices. Anybody who's a computer scientist knows why. And so all the students in the classroom could grab these crayons and draw on the screens at the same time. So they didn't have to actually fight for the crayons. So there was our first example of how to make that as collaborative as the box of crayons, quite literally. And then I think I'll try and play this and see how it goes. Again, these videos were so low res back in the day. Again, this is about 90, this is 98 or so. So we wanted to go into the schools and also take this notion of workplace democracy into the school and do something there. And so what does that mean? It means, for us it was like pupil empowerment. How can we actually take technology and make students feel empowered by it and become creators of that technology? So there was this thing called the blob that you could use this ability to have multiple mice and poke and prod it and have fun with it. Most of this in Sweden, at the very end, Swedish, at the very end it's in English, so I'll try and shut up for that. But they're having fun, like you can, gosh, I don't know what's going on with the speaker. It's too bad. So I don't know if you heard that, but that thing of like, you can make it anything you want. You know, it's just like so meaningful to a designer, like working with these children and trying to enable them as co-inventors and creators. we created a lot of really cool tools. Like this was a story die that had RFID tags on the sides, and students could record stories that would be attached to these images. And that was sort of a recording mode. And then we ended up a bit later, because our idea was, could we walk in, we were working with caves, like these big $1 million things with six-sided projection where you walk in, it's all immersive. We wanted to be able to walk into a classroom with a cave and unpack it, and then kids could do all sorts of creative things and then pack it back up. So this was a room, you can see the story die here. There's a bunch of foot pieces that were all attached and triggers. We had to write the whole operating system for this event system to work. That they could attach sound and image and also story elements to, and then things would get projected. There was also another place that gets projected and sound would happen. And so this culminated in something like 6 tellings of the Little Red Riding Hood, where students would do it and perform for each other and perform for parents. And it was really cool, because this is how messy it was, and this is how messy we wanted it to be. We didn't want it to be a clean, super high-tech $1 million thing. We wanted it to be in the classroom, kind of any teacher could unpack it and, excuse me, and all start to become creating. And so in the 90s, or creators, and so in the 90s, this was when technology was kind of being forced into the classroom and people were sitting in front of computers. So fast forward to IDEO, we did a number of big M-mode project, or so big mobile projects, and I remembered this one because this actually started on the day we invaded Iraq, which was a very disturbing day. And this project gave us a lot of credibility, because then all of a sudden people started seeking our team out for, we want the people who designed M-mode, and it was a lot of fun. And I'm leading into something here where I want to share a piece of research. And I want to ask you, so we're going to do a little lesson in design research. Watching these, think about what ideas get inspired by these. I think we have 4 people that are really quick. But I'm a little worried about the crackling and the sound, so let me just check this out. Make sure it's all connected. Okay. I have to tell you one thing. This first woman is in India, and there's something she talks about called a forward. And a forward in those days is they paid for a packet of SMSs, like 2,000 a month, and they were all like frantic about trying to use them all. And a forward is something, and which you can't actually do with the iPhone, is you forward on somebody's text message to you. So what you could do with a lot of them, like the Nokia phones, you would be forwarding these things on. So they become viral, much like social media is today.
I wrote a poem which was actually.
Sorry, that's just horrible.
Which became a forward, unfortunately. No, actually I just sent to my friends who don't know that I wrote the poem. She sent it to her friend sent it to their friends, and it became a forward. And the worst part is it came back to me. Yeah. Yeah. No, I knew that person. Yeah, he just sent to me saying, I feel like that right now. I said, that's my poem you asked. Oh, sorry.
For people my age bracket, 50 or 60% of our social life consists of science world.
These are friends who are singing. They sing like badly. Yes, a bit. But it was New Year's Eve.
I've got a Nokia N70. That's the most important thing in my life.
Is that one of the most important things?
Yeah, that's after clothing and all that. It comes before food though, because the first thing I do is get up, use my cell phone, and the last thing I do in a day is also use my cell phone.
So this really inspiring bunch of people, and we're going to get to like what is the inspiration in a moment. Here's a framework that we're getting to the title of the talk that we're using, and it's used to say value, and I changed it to meaning. There's one axis of meaning is like, what do you do with those stories we just heard, and how do you think about creating offerings from them? And the one axis is meaning, the other is usable. So if you can figure out what kind of meaning, what kind of value you want to create, how do you make those things usable? And there's a 2x2 here that has these 4 quadrants. So if you make something meaningful and you can make it usable so that somebody can actually extract that value from the thing, then you end up in that great space, the sort of delight, the quote delight. And if you make something that's really meaningful or valuable and you don't make it that usable, you end up in this kind of lower right place, the sort of frustration place. Like, oh, God, why did they do it that way? But, oh, this is so, and I think we all know that one. If you do neither, you kind of end up in this irrelevance. Like, it's poorly made, and I don't care about it anyway. If you do something that's really well crafted, it's really usable, and it doesn't have very much meaning, it becomes the kind of curiosity. Like, it's great, it's neat. Hey, I played with it for a few minutes, and I'm sure somebody would like it. And for that upper right, there's probably a bigger thing than delight. It's probably something about progress, something about meeting societal needs. And the point to this framework, one of the points, there's many points, one of the points is to go this way first. Is like, look for the meaning first. And then go this way. But if you go this way first, it's kind of at your peril. Like, there's a ton of stuff out there, because this way is also craft. It's like executing. It's like pixels. It's like locking stuff in. It's really hard to change. It's really hard. If you go this way first, it's really hard to go right afterwards. Because a lot of the engineering, a lot of the development happens in this. Like, you're actually launching something out. And like to say, oh, we made a car sharing app, and what we really should have made was a new bus. It's a very different proposition. It's very hard to take that car sharing app and change it. Very extreme examples. So if you go this way, you risk creating a curiosity. And, in some ways, isn't the world already too full of well-designed, meaningless stuff? So go this way. And what does this mean? Well, does the idea make someone's life easier or more effective at some basic level? Does the idea connect people? Does the idea help people to be more creative or even co-creative? Does the idea make the world more just, democratic, diverse? Does the idea address our most important problems? And does the idea open up more possibility? So let's take our friend. And what does it mean to be human-centered? We hear that a lot, and a lot of times it's used. And what do we mean? So how can we seek, especially for our friend here, the one who wrote a poem, seek and design for the collective potential and work towards something that's closer to collective creativity? Because in creativity, there are more options available to us in anything, whether it's creative around social policy, public policy, whether it's creative around engineering, whether it's creative around government or education. Creativity always gives us more options. And this guy, I just love the way he's so excited by his friends. He never looks back. He's just like, oh, my friends. And it's so clear that what he really wants is that he was using 4 devices there to capture this. It's like now he'd be using some app, it's a well-designed app. But you could just see the potential in this. Like, this guy is using video and he's capturing it in here and he's changing the format and he's trying to upload it. So here, I wanted to share a few examples of how technology has changed things. So here's one of my musical favorites. This is Thomas Dolby. And in 1989, I saw him give a talk at NYU. It was an academic kind of scholarship talk. He brought his whole kit, and it was enormous. It was just like all this stuff, but it was so amazing. He created a song right there live for us. He recorded something in, somehow captured that, then played in, layered up some other stuff. He had the audience put in some stuff, and he created a really cool song in front of us. And it was enormous. And it felt like, oh my God, I could never do that. Like, that's like, I don't know, $15,000 worth of kit. And then my friend Andrew, who's been singing all his life, and has really been pushing tech. Andrew's kind of an amazing person because he's a word guy and a tech guy and extremely creative. He's sitting here in the second row. And he's been live looping and a beatbox pioneer for over a decade. And he cobbles together lots of text. I just wanted to play this little clip. So what Andrew's doing here is layering stuff on top of each other with a kit that's like this size compared to Thomas Dolby's entire thing about 10 years later. And doing it live with just his voice. Really amazing stuff. And that's 2000. That was 2009, but I think you were doing this in 2004, right? 2002-ish? 5? Okay, thank you. So here's something. I'm not particularly a Billy Joel fan, but probably a lot of you. How many people have already seen this? Yeah, like a fair number. I just was really inspired by this because it's timely, and I'd like us just to notice something in it. And it's getting back to some of those moments with the kids and the blob, and that the interface is so accessible. And I love how these guys get into it, and how Jimmy seems so pleased that it actually worked. Clearly, they rehearsed it a lot, and how Billy is coaching Jimmy on singing. So watch for that. Here we go. So this goes on, and they get more into it, and there's just something beautiful because you can see they've transcended themselves. These are two master performers, right? They've rehearsed this. They've been on stage many times, but there are moments that are like real humanity in there, where they're just in it, and they start to jam on this. So and think about how YouTube has excited a new generation of people to create and find their creativity inside, and how Etsy has enabled a new generation of makers. And it seems that bald men are pretty creative. So this is going back to the other parts of the brain, the higher parts, that making commerce, that's not high brain function. And there's just so much more. So we look at government. This has happened in 2008. It's just amazing to me. So the iPhone came out in 2007. And just a year later, we had this incredible app that put calling power in the hands of anyone who was lucky enough to have such a device. Like, you could get a calling list, you could call people and say, this is what I think about this election, this is what you vote. This is amazing, right? But still, there's so much further we can go. Like, think about the potential for real democracy. And clearly, we all know how tech played a catalyst in the Arab Spring in a way that was really unprecedented, like mobilizing large groups of people. And many of these folks don't have smartphones, but a lot of them have feature phones, which may be one of the hottest and sexiest things to be designing for right now, because that's billions and billions of people. Such potential for collective creativity. I heard about this. This is a very simple thing. I heard this about 4 different people before I actually tried it. And essentially, it's just a set of guided meditations, but done in a really nice interface, kind of clued into some of the best practices that interactions might do. There's a lot of critique of this too, but it's like, are you going to sleep? Are you traveling? Are you in nature? Are you walking? And there's different ways to select. Essentially, it's just a list of podcasts, but it's actually done through an app that's kind of clever, and that's actually getting to higher selves. So what about this poor guy? I've been concerned about him. a lot of times the thing I was calling cooperative design comes over here is called human-centered design, but really what people are talking about is customer-centric design or consumer-centric design. And like, this guy is the thing's most important. You could hear that and go, oh, ka-ching, right? So how do we take care of this guy? How do we actually do something that helps him? He said it was the most important thing in his life. So right now as designers, this is a chance where I'm going to get to show some student work, which is exciting. We fought really hard for this moment. Like those of you, I'm looking around the room and I can see a number of people who've been in this field for 20 years. We fought really hard for interaction design to be important, to have a seat at the table. To like, oh, design is so valuable. We need to be helping make these decisions, not just like painting the pixels. We need to be helping create the value of this organization. And well, that time has come. Money loves interaction design. Business loves interaction design. And interaction designers are eager to work on the value they create. And I'm believing more and more, now that we're here in this moment, that it's just as important to keep one foot out, to remember that position, the human-centered position, to remember the artistry, to remember to not get completely sucked into the logic. So I believe this is where school comes in. So as the program matures, along with our first class of students, we've been trying to turn up the dial on skills towards more point of view. And I'd like to share a few of these pieces. So we did an exercise last fall, a very quick exercise where we were learning about critical design, and critical design is taking a stance on something and doing it through designed objects. I think you'll get the picture when I explain a few of these. So the first one is William here? Is a piece by William Clark. So we were doing a series of consumer apps. So what would be the ultimate consumer app? And we're using the app because that's a kind of language of today. We want to communicate in some way, that's our language. So the consumer app here is kind of building on the Black Friday phenomenon, but it's a driving app. So you can see a map where sales are popping up on the city, and as time goes on, the prices go up. Well, that's really cool. If I get there soon and I drive really fast, I can get it cheap. And there's also competitions. There's a challenge mode, so the first one that gets there. So what a cool thing, right? Sponsored by Shell. I think it says that somewhere. But the idea of this is to kind of turn up the knob on something. So here's another one by Casey. Is Casey here? Thank you. Hey, Casey. So Casey had this idea of Festivus, which is to help people kind of understand their stance in relation to others when it comes to holidays. So how many Halloween decorations do I have? How many do my neighbors have? What am I missing? Where should I be in that whole scam? And it was kind of a neat gesture because you'd have Christmas and there'd be a countdown to Christmas, and if you went this way, you'd come to Halloween. There was a countdown to Halloween. You could see this person, or you could see, this is you, and you could see what you were missing, you know, things that you could buy, and you could see all the other people and where they were and how they were ranked for this holiday. And the idea was there was a lot of growth here because there's a lot of holidays. Like if you do the superset of all the religious holidays on the planet, there's a lot of growth for this organization. We had another one. This is the only one that I think actually has become a product since it was made. Is Elizabeth here? So this is by Elizabeth Ibarra, and she had this idea of acquire. You see it, you snap it, you get it. And so as soon as you snap, I love those shoes, it goes and looks for shoes that are very similar, offers them up to you. And I read an article that the first semi-successful app for Google Glass was exactly this. Like, look and buy, excellent. Then we also did the same thing for community. So that was for, let's make the ultimate commerce app, let's make the ultimate community app. And a lot of those were very straightforward, like the kind of social networks for small communities on steroids. And this one by Laurel Deal, who I know is not here, she's not feeling well, is really polemic. She actually did a funny thing. She presented it as a straightforward app, and then in the middle, the colors changed from blue to red, and she goes, but that's not the way it really works. Communities are catty, they tear each other apart. My HOA, they're always trying to like sucker their neighbors into something else. So it gave people a way to see the feed, of course, a way to tattle on other people, A curb claim is apparently when you're going to have a party and you want to reserve parking spaces. You can gossip and you can kind of communicate with the HOA. But I love it, and I think one of the things that's interesting here was the voice, like letting this voice come through. Those tensions that we don't always get to talk about. We don't always get to talk about them in a kind of commercial setting. I think some of the best organizations do because they realize there's potentially opportunity in them. And certainly in the school, we want to try and use the best practices in craft, but also be looking at things that aren't necessarily something that somebody would pay them for. In fact, when we were talking about the senior thesis, we're saying do something that nobody would pay you for. And I'm not going to give away too many of those because there's going to be a great show on, Casey, when is it? 17th of May? 15th? 15th of May? Did I get it right? 15th of May, Thursday night. And then, Evan has done this great Breaker app. And Breaker is, how would you like to break up with someone? And you can choose, do you want to do it by instant message, email, or Twitter? Who do you want to break up with? You can choose them from your contacts. You can send them a message, and then there's a way to give them a gift. And the idea here is that people start to develop their breakup registry, and you could choose from that. So there's a whole system behind that. It's really lovely. Anybody in a relationship, love to, here's my registry. Okay, we're good. Ben & Jerry's, Kleenex, everybody. Okay. So that's that series. Here's a really beautiful piece. The object here was to go out in the cityscape and make strangers interact. And these students chose the bus. The bus stop. So this really worked. This was out in the space. Strangers are interacting. Strangers are laughing. Things are different. And that was Naomi Kwan, Aaron Stevens, and Brian Wong. Are you guys here? Wonderful piece. Here's another one by Casey. I think I just have a few seconds here. Oh no, sorry. This is another team doing the same brief. Sorry about the interlace problem. So these are two phones that they hacked, put them out in the street. Looks like that's not coming through. That's fine. Is that team here? Another really great piece, and they hack these very simple things that people just want to pick up, and especially using such old phones. But that's not just it. There's the artifact that's in the street, but it's actually changing the landscape. It's actually changing the way we are thinking and working with that landscape. Feels like one channel's not coming through or something. I think you can read the quotes though. Yeah, I think there's just mono coming through. So these people, at least you can see their expressions and read the quotes, they're just talking about how different the city is as a result of this piece. So that's the other result. It's not just the piece, it's actually, there's a changed memory. And this was part of the urban hacking class, the objects in space class that we do in the fall. So here's the piece I was going to talk about, Casey's from last year. So our sophomore year is very straight up interaction design as it's practiced out in the world. And our junior year starts to get into what interaction design is becoming, like things that think, objects that are smart. And then our senior year is really about point of view, like what is it that I want to do, what is it that I want to affect in the world. So I thought this was a really nice piece. And the last one I'm going to show here is one by Jasmine Calderon. Are you here, Jasmine? Really lovely. So our students, this is in the wearables class, and I think I might be done with video. She was inspired, it was Day of the Dead, about that time, Halloween, and her grandfather had died. And she made a piece that could, using a heartbeat detector, so she had got this sensor that could detect heartbeats. And the idea here is that each bead is an ancestor, is a relative, and it's their heartbeats. And so that when somebody passes on, this piece lives on, and you can feel the beats in the locket itself. And so it's really a profound piece, and it also gets to what I think would be a wonderful brief, which is how can we make technology an heirloom, right? Because technology is often so much not an heirloom. Something I'm really inspired by outside of school is what they're doing. What Terry Winograd, who's one of our program advisors and one of my heroes, is a program in liberation technology, like really looking at how can technology be used for liberation. That's democracy, justice, how can we increase all those things? The last point I was going to make is that, and so many iceberg images for systems, is that everything is systemic. And I saw Tim's here. Tim does a wonderful class in systems design for the sophomores. And this is such a critical thing to understand because everything is systemic. And I'm sure many of you have seen the sort of systems iceberg, as it were, that events are on the surface. Below that are patterns and behaviors and structures and mindsets. And the ability to kind of go through those is so critical. And they're often hard to change, but being able to see that whole thing and then be able to find what you can change now and to be able to hold those opportunities that take longer to change and change them as you go. Much of that can be life's work is so critical and so important. And bringing it back to our neighborhood, the idea of how might we do a student project around homelessness in the CCA area keeps coming up. In fact, I don't even know it, and we've probably done it many times. And this isn't a 3-month project, and that's what our semesters are. It's a complex problem with many, many layers. And if you were to really go into it, because it's not just people don't have homes, right? It's people don't have adequate care, there's not enough funding, there's probably not enough taxes to make that funding happen, or there's not enough resources to somehow make all the kind of stuff happen that really should be happening. And as we walk around the city, we have to absence from this every day. There's policy solutions, there's communication solutions, there's urban planning solutions, there's architecture solutions, there's food services solutions, and there's the kind of solutions that come up when you do a project, which is like temporary shelter solutions. And I think a big question as we think about our most complex problems is how do we hold that notion? How do we remain mindful of the many layers of opportunity without going mad? And there's such responsibility. This is a Jonas Salk quote that's just really profound. So we have an incredible responsibility for what's happening in the world. And we need to move beyond our current constraints because the business as usual is not going to take us out. And how do we kind of stay tuned into this using design thinking and all sorts of other kind of powerful design methodologies to remain with our eyes open and aware? And how do we hang on to optimism and stay in contact with the world? Because sometimes I worry, like with the Tinder app or something, we're actually overburdening our capacity to hold irony, to hold sarcasm. And that starts to become reality. So there's no talk on meaning without a quote from Viktor Frankl. And this is our real power. And this, as designers, is the real place to affect changes in our actions and our response. And there's a great quote that your system is designed perfectly to get the results it gets. So to get different results, you have to actually change something in there. And I'm hoping that we as this program and the students and the alumni will all be on a quest to try and figure that out, because I don't think anyone really knows. And I invite you all to help us figure that out.